Welcome to the Philosophy for Philistines channel on March the 3rd. Today will be a day of reflection, my own reflection, of my own miserable, sinful, and reprobate nature. Who out there can admit that they too are a miserable reprobate? I am my own worst enemy. But in understanding why we are our own worst enemy, because all human beings are, we need to understand the nature of our own desire for self-destruction and ruin, because that is one of the dark things that resides deeply in the heart of every man. We will do anything to corrupt our own cakes, to eat the most uneconomical rubbish. So, there are three pathogens, mental pathogens, that corrupt civil society and that make life less than what it should be. I call them the evil triumvirate. This is, of course, inspired by Dr. Peterson's new book, Beyond Order, which I recommend those who don't listen to his lectures all the time to get quickly. Poor Dr. Peterson, he's gone through hell and back these last few years. Anyway, the evil triumvirate of mental pathogens undermining civil society. Being deceitful corrupts reality itself in an attempt to deconstruct it. Now, it's obvious that none of us may know the whole truth all of the time. None of us do. But we can choose to avoid telling lies, things that we know to be untrue. Being resentful is the attitude that everything and everyone can go to hell because the universe is futile and unearned rewards go to those that don't deserve it. That's the second pathogen. And the third is arrogance. That is a belief that I already know all the things I need to know, and you're not about to teach me anything. It's interesting, and I've often spoken about it, that in Scandinavia, they have a code called janteloven, which comes from a book written by an author whose last name was Sandemosa, about a fictitious town in Denmark by the name of Jante. And janteloven is basically the code that operated in that town, and it is heavily based on these three idea pathogens. I'm going to talk about my own personal experiences today because for the moment that serves me best. And I want to discuss one thing in particular with regard to something that has become abundantly clear. The radical left has hijacked those three mental pathogens and weaponized them. They are basically the essential precepts upon which critical theory of the Frankfurt School is built on. Cultural Marxist critical theory. There was an article published in YouTube about how Australian universities are on a high list of institutions that are being corrupted by the CCP. And it's fascinating to note that cultural Marxism has taken the long march through all of our institutions, starting with the academy, and has produced a generation of graduates that are thoroughly and utterly corrupted by these mental pathogens. Prior to 2012 and me going off to Norway, I cared little about society's ills for the simple reason that I was too busy enjoying myself. And I would react to things that I thought got too silly and say something, and my friends would in turn become angered with me because I am the least of all political correct people. But I paid little attention to it because I was too busy booking music, hanging out with my buddies, and having a good time. Norway changed all of that. When I met Anna Siri and we became involved in trying to develop a course for integrity in business that was provoked by the crisis of 2008, the financial meltdown caused by the big banks, I thought that there might be an opportunity to sell that course in Scandinavia. Of course, I was quite wrong. And I was also in for the biggest culture shock of my life. I went into a society that was so politically correct, so homogenous, and so rigid in its thought processes that to disagree with the state-run consensus, this Hegelian nightmare that you existed only as an extension of the state-run collective, was thoroughly injected into every single aspect of life, not just in Norway, but in all of Scandinavia. And I found it off-putting and wanted to come home. And fortunately, my wife was able to find employment here in Canada. So we returned in 2015. To my horror, I found that the same mental pathogens, those three things, had thoroughly infected Canada. And I came home to a musical community that so insists on homogeneity that to speak out against the socialist collective has almost become an impossibility among them. So essentially, I returned to a country that had gone the way that Scandinavia had taken well over 150, 200 years to go. And it happened here like that. I can't believe the cloying need for social conformity that exists in Canadian society today. It is my single greatest concern that a country once built on self-reliance and independence of thinking and free speech and universal suffrage and equality before English common law has turned into a society divided by identity politics, sexual orientation, ethnicity, God knows what. I am so heartily sick and tired of and every single one of the radical leftists that have adopted critical theory as an essential part of their mojo also are sympathizing with communist China and its oppression of its own people. I want you to note that every single totalitarian regime has the left's sympathy. So all this talk about social justice, whenever it comes to a totalitarian regime oppressing its people, murdering them, using them as living organ harvesting platforms, you hear nothing but crickets from the radical left. Quit lying. Quit believing that life is unfair because, the government has to redistribute resources, because there's not a single instance in the history of mankind where the government has been able to equitably distribute resources. In fact, every time that they attempt to do this, they create a wealthy socialist aristocracy hell-bent on oppressing its citizens. And lastly, open your ears and your eyes. You think you know it all, and you know nothing. In Hovedmal, the ancient Scandinavian writings that were written down up in Iceland, where the ancient language is still spoken, there's a story about the man that dwelled between two mountains, knowing everything where he lived. You're living between two mountains that are an echo chamber for the idiocy that the radical left running our school system has fed you. Wake up, open your eyes, look at reality, and understand that if we don't fight back now, there'll never be a chance in the future. The future is up to you and to me to resurrect limited constitutional government and to bring back free speech and open discourse and critical thinking to our universities. God bless you. Have a great day. There's something to pray about.